Hello, I am Angelyn Spignesi, Koplik-Arden, and I am going to present my synopsis of Charlotte Bronte's Chapter 7 of Jane Eyre, and then that will follow with my lyrical analysis of that chapter. Synopsis of Chapter 7, which I entitle Natural Curl. The first quarter at Lowood. The severe cold cuts through the shoes, swelling the feet already raw, inflamed each night, agonizing force back into the shoe in the morning. The other students hastily steal favorable places in front of the hearth after an afternoon paralyzed from the cold of the church service. These, quote, famished great girls, end quote, provoke, even menace the younger ones to give over some of their meager portions of food. Finally, back after the long service, bitter wind of the exposed road, quote, almost flayed the skin from our faces, end quote. We were frozen on that road, walking, even the teachers dejected, except Miss Temple actively encouraging us on as the, quote, stalwart soldiers, end quote. The Sunday evenings are spent by heart repeating 5th, 6th, 7th chapters of Matthew and listening to Miss Miller's long sermon as the young girls, here they are falling in a slumber, we have to prop them up. Sitting with slate in hand one afternoon, I am puzzling over a long division sum, and the long, he is narrow, figure of Brocklehurst passes. It is the same black column, the, quote, coming man, end quote. The one I have feared as awaited, this one who would carry forth Mrs. Reed's curse, quote, brand me as the bad child forever, end quote. We all rise. Brocklehurst speaks to Miss Temple. Only one darning needle to be given out to each pupil. The black hose should be mended better. The extra luncheon of bread and cheese, by what authority was it introduced? Miss Temple replies she is responsible. She could not let the pupils fast until dinner time after the burnt porridge, which they could not eat. Allow him an instant. His plan for us as, quote, hardy, patient, self-denying, end quote. None of this, quote, luxury and indulgence, end quote. He is saying, quote, should any little accidental disappointment of the appetite occur, such as the spoiling of a meal, the under or overdressing of a dish, the incident ought not to be neutralized by replacing with something more delicate the comfort lost, thus pampering the body and obviating the aim of this institution. It ought to be improved to the spiritual edification of the pupils by encouraging them to evince fortitude under the temporary privation, end quote. Now he is exclaiming on the martyrs and how it is a starving of our immortal souls if bread and cheese substitute burnt porridge. It is a feeding of the body vile. Miss Temple hears this gazing straight ahead, her face a marble cold and fixed, mouth and brows settling into their, quote, petrified severity, end quote. Brocklehurst suddenly gives a start. Hands shaking, the cane is pointing toward a girl, and he is asking, what is that girl with curled hair? Miss Temple quietly states the girl's name. He asks why in his establishment is her hair the mass of red curls. Even more quietly, Miss Temple responds that her hair curls naturally. Brocklehurst, quote, naturally? Yes, but we are not to conform to nature. I wish these girls to be the children of grace. And why that abundance, end quote. Cut it, the hair only modest, plain. He is ordering a row of girls to stand and turn around. He will survey their plates. Involuntary smile curls Miss Temple's lips, now covered by her handkerchief. I am leaning back further to witness the looks and grimaces on the girls' faces. Their comment to him with their back to him, no, this man cannot alter the inside of who they are. His verdict, cut off those top knots of a vanity. Brocklehurst pursues. Madam, he says, quote, I have a master to serve whose kingdom is not of this world. My mission is to mortify in these girls the lusts of the flesh, end quote. And he is pronouncing against the embellishments of a female nature when the three other visitors enter. They had been inspecting the dormitories, and now they reproach one of the teachers. In velvet, gray beaver hats, ostrich plumes, the false front of French curls, these the wife and daughters of Brocklehurst, to whom Miss Temple gives seats of honor. Jane's slate drops. It crashes to the floor, splits in two. Brocklehurst recognizes her. He had almost forgotten. He calls her to come forward. Miss Temple is whispering to me as I pass that it was only an accident. I am pierced by this kindness. Quote, another minute and she will despise me for a hypocrite, thought I, and an impulse of fury against Reed, Brocklehurst, and company bounded in my pulses at the conviction I was no Helen Burns, end quote. Now he places me on a stool before all with those waves of plumage beyond of his ladies, as he announces me an agent of the evil one. For I am a castaway, alien, not of the fold. Interloper, I must be scrutinized, even excluded from their company if necessary, since I am a liar. A pause of 10 minutes. The Brocklehurst ladies take out their handkerchiefs, and I would have contaminated the home of my pious benefactress. I am diseased to be healed. I was sent to Lowood, imploring the teachers, quote, not to allow the waters to stagnate round me, end quote. He leaves with an order. I remain on the stool for half an hour longer, and no one is to speak a word to me the remainder of this day. There was a time I thought I could not stand the shame of standing in the room for all to see, and here I am exposed on a, quote, pedestal of infamy, end quote. No language for what arises in me, now stifling my breath, constricting my throat. And yet here is a girl passing, and with what a strange light in her eyes, the ray of which bears me up. Extraordinary sensation through me, quote, I mastered the rising hysteria, lifted up my head, and took a firm stand on the stool, end quote. After a brief question for which she is chided, Helen Burns returns to her seat, smiling at me again as she goes by. Quote, what a smile! I remember it now, and I know that it was the effluence of a fine intellect, of true courage. It lit up her marked lineaments, her thin face, her sunken gray eye, like a reflection from the aspect of an angel, end quote. Her exercise blotted wrongly, condemned to a bread and cheese dinner by Miss Scatcherd. This girl passing wears the untidy badge on her arm. How the teacher focuses on her defect, cannot see what she inspires, quote, full brightness of the orb, end quote. So that ends the synopsis of chapter 7. I'll begin now the lyrical analysis. Spark of spirit, her speaking was fervent, gentle, brilliant guidance of a great girl and an awesome teacher. And perhaps we have begun to ease into what is of woman surrounding us. Then all we know is that everything again is freezing. We expect Brocklehurst, daily fear him. Not yet an entry to Helen's Lowood, sent by Mrs. Reed to learn punitive constriction that severs, a prohibition. Yet this girl speaks severance through love, and at a hearth we have been bent toward her word. Mrs. Reed's Brocklehurst has led us to another order, female, aesthetic intelligence. Our touching to it returns Mrs. Reed's fear of that nature. We await him. Mrs. Reed, who raised us to know his moral opposition, stripping us from our nursery haze. With his erection, she slit through our numbness, splitting us out of Gateshead. Has he more lessons? Sensing him always possible in this Lowood place. We await the, quote, coming man, end quote. As we feel his presence imminent, we have difficulty in the entry, first quarter. We observe, we pick up sensations, but all appears rote and very cold. Our life becomes routine. We feel outside ourselves, cold, only rote behaviors. Gates had its privileges. It seized us, and we were in the sizzling heat. At times we thought we were well fed. But here it is very cold, and we have trouble entering. Our inflamed foot does not fit comfortably into the frozen morning shoe. Used to outburst, we do not trust the motion in this Helen landscape. Used to hell's fire explosive, how can this cool, white light stir us? Here it seems too still. We were one with the Gateshead reaction, and there is no violent motion to follow here. Austere. The spirits are not moving in the frozen pew. The church service does not warm us. We sit rigidly, stingy allotment of cold meat and bread. We still have the bitter walk back, 2 miles. We sit paralyzed. Air's frozen shut, the same drone. Only Miss Temple musters an urging, seems foreign, and we cannot join. We cannot find that soldier of whom she speaks, stalwart soldier. No entry, nothing stirs. We await the coming man. Our fear of Brocklehurst is also our desire of Mrs. Reed. A desire, after all, to return to that family, the familiar mode of explosive prohibition fires. Reedian outburst, all we have known of desire is familiar. We fear this closeness to the woman in this new place. Our fear returning to hers of us. The way we crimsoned before her, saying, "Stand, mother, within your own red heat." Now our fear, that is also hers, awaiting him. Gateshead had its compelling forces. Here the other teachers are dejected, frozen themselves, and in the evening the younger girls slump, fall under during the sermon, too long, too cold. We are not moved. We await it from the outside, but all appears routine, asleep, ice still. We have carried Mrs. Reed's Gateshead curse here, awaiting Brocklehurst to proclaim it. And we see that a great greed arises in this place of the cold, hollow hunger. The larger girls are famished. They push their way to the front of the hearth. They make us divide and relinquish our bread slice. Eagerly, they consume much of our coffee, the closest heat of the day. Hating our place of her desire, she ensnared us, becoming all we could for her, entangled body. This collective female body can ensnare, we fear, as did she. Ensnare is our fear. He will arrive, speaking condemnation soon. Our fear of blending into the female nature becomes a paranoia. He will, quote, brand us as a bad child forever, end quote. We do not relax and let go into these great girls. Instead, they take, and we give it over to them. Still feeding out is the Gateshead curse. Our portion to them as we refuse to bend toward the long sermon. Here the women are convening, and yet it becomes petrified as we watch out for him living her curse. We understand these chapters of Matthew, the wisdom words, shepherd of authority, spoken the Beatitudes. We are blessed as meek, as mourning, as merciful, as persecuted and hungering for righteousness. We will be heard, satisfied. No eye for eye, instead not to resist the evil one. And of those who boast their prayer, blatant their gifts of alms, who fast to be seen, these are the hypocrites. Instead of secrecy, the shepherd whispers secrecy. He says so with an authority. We listen. As above, so below, on earth as it is in heaven. Judge not here, and so not judged. Measure given out is what is gotten. Ask, seek, knock. Beware the false prophet. These words done will be the house of rock. In any flood, firm foundation, winds blown and beaten. Then the teacher gives a sermon, yet there is no movement. That woman is not carrying the shepherd, has not made it to the woman. We are women listening, but how do we as women live those words? Can that shepherd lead us to our mother, for we are orphans, and it has been such a long day in the cold. The younger ones fall under in their slumber. We are learning long division at Lowood. We see the differentiated parts and how they stand on their own. Dividend contains its divisor, the number of times as quotient. Dividend within bracket collective body. We want to begin to differentiate within the collective body, know the unit by its specified and related parts. We want to begin to differentiate within the collective body. We know we are still tied to her, will always be related, though we are attempting to deny that relation, split off from it completely, since she was consuming us, using our motion only as her own until we had to burst out for her, impulsively discharge, to sever. She would not feed us distinctly. How to divide? At Gateshead, division as impulsive discharge, blatant discord until a gray field interior where someone asked a question. Speaking subject, someone here a subject of our question. Her Brocklehurst had given us the distance, and we could see her contour as we found speaking subject, yet still not in relation. In the Gateshead mode, either we are hers completely, fused within her regress, recess, or completely split, irrevocably unrelated, and we have screamed it. At Gateshead, one is not different and related. The division on this Lowood slate, though, here the parts stay related. Here division has its inherent pattern indicating the relation of specific parts to collective body, the design of its patterning inherent in the division, as divisor and as quotient, differentiated out of the bracket, yet still related. We want to be stripped of Gateshead embellishment, that inflated madness impulse, know ourselves outside the bracket, standing rock foundation, not shattered. We want to divide. In the long division lesson, the long way to know division, it is slow and the slate is cold. In the long division, the first lesson is splitting. Before we learn the relation of different parts, we first split divisor out of dividend. And the only way we have known splitting is when we did not want to leave that nursery, still our desire to be held within her body, pacing outside the door when summoned. The only way we have known division is through splitting in condemnation, Brocklehurst. For he has to be passed through first in our lesson of division. Our freezing fingers are writing long division sums on a dark slate, upon which the long shadow of the narrow minister falls. The shepherd had advised us not to flaunt our prayer, to know ourselves stripped as wholly invisible. Yet this minister turns the words of that Christ to torment our visible body. What could have had the comfort once it was touched by her, now only vile. Our mothers left uncontained in their own nature, so we too shunned it. We have been touched by a discovered mother, and we recoil, resist. We hear Brocklehurst whispering, curse of the mothers. Generations passing terror of these waves the preacher condemns, says Split. We have not realized it was only the first lesson. The preacher condemns. As we listen, we confuse him with those scriptures. And we are splitting from our collective body. We seize Brocklehurst first, woman to woman convening. Brocklehurst arises first. The temptation of the Lowood place of collective female body, where we begin to learn of differentiation, of severance through love, propriety, the erotic coolness of our nature, is Brocklehurst rigidity where the cold becomes prohibition. I have now a lyrical section on this. When the dust begins its cover on my wooden floor, often the broom is not enough. I get down on my knee with a large cotton cloth. I rub those boards until the cloth's handprint becomes clearly visible, and for the floor it is practically a polishing. I prefer all my tiny glass figurines in an exact angle on their table, everything aligned according to the order of their finest regard, as the even proportion of towels arranged by color and size in the bathroom pleases me. But it is a Thanksgiving coming, those children, nieces and nephews crawling. They will be under my feet and rolling and scratching, and they will be crawling. So I have to walk a foot above my own polished floor, no longer in its cleanliness, the hands of those children carrying the grime of all ages settling into each of this floor's crack. And my figurines, what will they look like on that highest shelf? There they must be sequestered 4 days from the curious hands of children groping. They will reach for my ankles. Most likely I shall have to pinch. My cousin will be in my bed. I will remove my favorite sheets. She sleeps so wildly, the crumbling. In the bathroom, her bag of makeup will disarray. She may put her toothbrush very close to mine, forget, wrongly reach, use mine instead. So I must ensure to check the degree of its wetness, scrutinize before, and if necessary, sterilize it. After washing her hands, streaks of dirt are left upon the soap. The child will call me aunt. She will reach up at me with those fingers grasping. She will want my hold, my food, my purse. I will not give a thing, for it would be a pampering. The older will bring in the latest essay written at school, the watercolor. I will simply nod as withholding the praise so desired would swell her head. Okay, so now back to the lyrical analysis. Brocklehurst contaminates as he fears contamination. His supercilious stance implicates us, makes us feel guilty. We become polluted through his gaze, and in this way he spreads, indeed, is the source of pollution. He infects through his prohibition and its inherent accusation, spreading pollution, dirtying through contact. Miss Temple is who is not contaminated by Brocklehurst. She sits as marble, hard, off-white stone, has definite boundary. Do not resist evil. She does not absorb a word of him as he is spreading himself. She does not resist as she does not absorb, since she knows the tragedy of a woman Brocklehurst possessed, who superciliously precludes all contact, becomes a dirty contact. Quote, coldness and fixity, end quote, of her marble, his word not part of her teaching. If she had lent him ear of the bowed head, if he entered the slightest crevice, who would depart this one she serves of her temple, and turning Brocklehurst on herself, all appetite loses. For his demand is to eradicate nourishment, any increase of life cell. He suspects multiplication. His suspicion is contagious and in fact multiplies. We have absorbed him when we do not trust our appetite or any internal motion defining. Brocklehurst's definition cuts off, is at the expense of nourishment, not multiplication of life cell related to human nature, yet multiplication of life cell through splitting by renunciation of all nature. When his prohibition force arises, it suspects, it infects. His moral law therefore increases guilt. The more we listen to him, the more guilty we become. Yet he speaks while a teacher sits by. He appears in the company of who does not take on his contact. He raises in full regard, in sight of, his antidote. Miss Temple does not engage with Brocklehurst because she stands for her decision of appetite. She holds it, is held by it. Prohibitive and punitive, Brocklehurst would sever us from a woman's hold, that one faring appetite only blind to her son's compensatory concupiscence. At Gateshead, Brocklehurst's severance, that form of Mrs. Reed's sadism, and we discharge to a distinct interior voice saying, quote, what shall I do, end quote, bringing us to a place where our senses can sense outside, we sense exterior. And here, when Mrs. Reed's sadistic form of severance arises, it does not have an effect on who already perceives herself as distinct, firm encasement, boundaried, and who has not even attempted to appropriate us. Off-white marble, quote, petrified severity, end quote. The stone of Miss Temple severs without cutting, yet wards off. She does not take his recrimination, and her severity is the lesson to which Brocklehurst's severance was aiming, yet hers is without sadism. She separates herself not by cutting off or up another's pleasure. Learning long division. His was only the first lesson of splitting, and his temptation is, once outside the bracket, to repudiate that collective body, split entirely from that nature, the female body. When the temple place is to stand for the appetite of the collective body, he is deflected. Unable to infect Miss Temple, he is deflected off her surface. Left to his own device, he begins to spread, to bring himself out in a way ironical and finally comical. He is deflected off Miss Temple to the girl of the red curl. We were beginning to learn division in the collective place of woman when he entered. We use him for the first splitting, divisor out of dividend. We sense an alterity arriving us at Lowood, but the only way he has known this severance from collective body is through condemnation. One side only superior. We meet Brocklehurst and suddenly we begin thinking not horizontally out of the bracket, yet oppositionally, in a way hierarchical. Once we learn our long division, however, we see that divisions do not preclude, even necessitate a multiplication, which stays related to the collective body. They require that quotient and divisor multiply and move in and out of the dividend collective. So multiplication is a requirement within division, not an excess. Division has a place for all the parts, suggests heterogeneous body, necessitates multiplication, no outcast by annihilation or contempt. Division has a place for all its parts. Remaining possessed by Brocklehurst at the initial splitting stage precludes learning the natural order of long division, how multiplication is inherent in division, and how differentiation is to be within collective nature. We can learn from nature. Nature cuts back herself, even tears herself asunder. She strips herself of her own overgrowth. As minister pronounces curl and braid the sin, with cutting the penance, the lips of the teacher curl, the girl's features bend and grimace and curl. Nature will not let herself be eradicated by a figure who ministers outside her this way. Curl, swirling force containing a most vibrant inhibition. Jane arrived at Lowood to learn severance, formal schedule, and marble discipline, distinction from the mother without losing or condemning the mother as our only desire, decentered desire of what was mother. Natural curl needed at Lowood. Curl allows us to learn division within the Lowood place without splitting accusatorially. After extraction, divisor curls back into dividend to differentiate quotient. Curl defies splits. Curl enfolds, cuts back on itself, inhibits without condemnation. The power of the curl is as secretive as the edge of a smile. Curl serves as antidote to the rigidity setting in Brocklehurst splitting, prevents teachings of severance from becoming sadistic, autocratic. Teaching severance requires a bending, or else a cracking into hypocrisy ensues, because even as she divides herself, nature will not cease her curl. The Brocklehurst ladies enter. False front of French curls, he dresses up his woman as he preaches on the vanity of the curl. When we absorb Brocklehurst, our obsessions become extravagant, huge dramas of prohibition. Our attempt to keep the baby clean warrants a huge cast of housekeepers and a vigilance on every germ. We chase that germ in an excessive drama. Splitting necessitates desire for the lost part. Brocklehurst is Jane's split from Gateshead, abrupt cut, where she is not divided, in fact is actually still fused as alien. That is, her marginality at Lowood is yet her allegiance to Gateshead, and within her split lies her desire still of the Reeds, Gateshead luxury and its arbitrary discharges. Her Reedian hold where desire is hot burst requiring prohibition, and love is only possession. We feared him all along, and when he comes, as he must through our potent fear stemming from a desire for the stepmother which draws him to us, our long division slate splits. As Brocklehurst appears, we face our splits. His battering is the curse of our return to her as we see behind him. What backs Brocklehurst is the mother and 2 daughters. Pompously they are taking seats of honor. We hold on tightly to Gateshead by his splittings. All right, so I'm going to end this part of the lyrical analysis of Chapter 7, and I will continue it in the next video. Thank you for listening.